Among the 100 hot rods Hot Rod magazine considers the most important ever built, number 53 is an unlikely choice. It is not a Hemi-powered Willys. It is not a supercharged Corvette. It is not one of the enormous, flame-spitting dragsters that defined American straight-line racing. It is a Volkswagen Beetle. More specifically, it is a small red 1956 oval window Beetle that began as a teenager's everyday car, weighed roughly 1,200 pounds in racing trim, and spent the 1960s humiliating machines that looked far more serious. Its name was the EMPI Inch Pincher. The car eventually ranked ahead of several icons of American speed, including machines associated with Mickey Thompson, Stone, Woods and Cook, Big John Mazmanian, and Craig Breedlove. Yet during its competitive years, many traditional hot rodders could barely stand the sight of it. They did not despise the Beetle because it broke the rules. They despised it because it followed them perfectly and kept winning. At drag strips across Southern California, the same scene played out again and again. A tiny German economy car would creep toward the starting line beside a heavily modified American V8. Spectators would laugh, groan, or openly boo. Then the lights would count down, the Beetle would launch, and the laughter would disappear. The Inch Pincher was not merely quick for a Volkswagen. It became one of the cars that proved an air-cooled VW could be a legitimate racing platform. Its story began with Joe Vitone. In 1954, Vitone opened Econo Motors, a Volkswagen and Porsche dealership in Riverside, California. He was not a lifelong Volkswagen purist. His early automotive interests were rooted in traditional American hot rodding, and his first car had been a 1932 Ford Model B. What caught his attention was not nostalgia. It was opportunity. The Beetle was becoming increasingly popular in the United States, but the performance and replacement parts available for it were often poor. Vitone once purchased components from an East Coast supplier and later asked what kind of warranty came with them. The answer was essentially this: if the part broke into two pieces, the customer was welcome to keep both. That response convinced him there was room for something better. Vitone created European Motor Products Incorporated, better known as EMPI, and began producing Volkswagen parts that were simple, durable, and properly engineered. One of the company's first products was a replaceable valve guide designed to solve a common cylinder head wear problem. That approach became the foundation of EMPI: identify a weakness, design a practical solution, and manufacture it well. Joe's son, Darrell Vitone, was still a child when his father brought home an early Beetle. Darrell quickly became fascinated with Volkswagens, and that fascination would shape nearly every stage of his life. By high school, he was driving a bright red 1956 oval window Beetle through Riverside. It had chrome wheels, a sport exhaust, and the original 30-horsepower engine. It was attractive, personal, and modestly customized, but it was still essentially a street car. No one could have known that this same little Beetle would become one of the most famous Volkswagens in American motorsport. Its first major step toward racing did not happen on a California drag strip. It happened in the Bahamas. Joe Vitone knew Dan Gurney and had sold him a Porsche Speedster early in Gurney's career. When a Volkswagen Grand Prix was organized in Nassau for 1963, Vitone saw an ideal chance to promote EMPI in Volkswagen performance. He asked Gurney to drive Darrell's red Beetle. The car was tested at Riverside Raceway and prepared with only modest improvements: an anti-roll bar, a camber compensator, a sport exhaust, and the standard 30-horsepower engine. Gurney then took it to Nassau and won. A nearly stock Beetle driven by one of America's best racers was already a strong marketing story. EMPI returned the following year, when the regulations allowed greater engine modification. That was when Dean Lowry became central to the story. Lowry had experience racing Chryslers before joining Econo Motors. He was more than a mechanic. He understood how to rethink an engine, how to find performance where the factory had never intended it, and how to turn ordinary components into racing hardware. For the 1964 event, Lowry reworked the cylinder heads and altered the valve springs. The Beetle crossed the line first, but officials later disqualified it because the springs did not comply with the rules. Joe Vitone was furious and lost interest in continuing with road racing. Lowry, however, had already begun looking in another direction. He assembled a 1,700 cubic centimeters Volkswagen engine, stripped weight from the oval window beetle, and brought it to a drag strip. That decision changed the future of Volkswagen racing. To understand why the inch pincher became so effective and so irritating to its rivals, it is necessary to understand the NHRA gas class system of the period. The gas categories were intended for cars running gasoline rather than nitromethane or methanol. They were separate from the fuel classes, where top-fueled dragsters and funny cars were already producing almost unimaginable power. Instead of grouping cars only by engine size, the gas classes used a weight-to-displacement formula. The total weight of a car was divided by the engine's cubic inch displacement, and the result determined its class. That meant a very light car with a small engine could compete within the same overall structure as a much heavier car with a much larger engine. Several lower gas categories were open to naturally aspirated four-cylinder combinations. The Beetle's air-cooled flat-four fitted the rules extremely well. The inch pincher was not exploiting a loophole. It was placed in its class by the same formula applied to everyone else. The elimination system also used handicapped starts based on class indexes. A slower indexed car could leave before a quicker one. In practice, this sometimes meant the Volkswagen was already well down the strip before the V8 in the opposite lane received a green light. Imagine being the other driver. You have spent several winters building an American V8, carefully selecting parts, tuning the chassis, and polishing every detail. Then you pull alongside a tiny Volkswagen. Its engine is buzzing behind the rear axle. The crowd treats it like a joke. The starting sequence begins. The Beetle leaves first. By the time your light turns green, it may already be in third gear. That was the source of the anger. The system was legal, the Volkswagen was properly classified, and the results still felt unbearable to the people losing against it. Lowry continued refining the car. Denzel cylinder heads and twin Solex carburetors helped move it into the 13-second range. A larger 1,900 cubic centimeters combination followed, using modified cylinder heads and a pair of 48 IDA Weber carburetors. At the Riverside half-mile drags in April 1966, Lowry recorded 22.04 seconds at 115.5 miles per hour. The timing crew reportedly doubted the result and made him run again. The second pass confirmed the first. The most dramatic experiment came after Joe and Daryl Vitone traveled to England and met Chris Shorrock, who produced superchargers for small British engines. They returned with a Shorrock supercharger and installed it on a 1,600 cubic centimeters Volkswagen engine using a British SU carburetor. On EMPI's dynamometer, the methanol-fueled combination reportedly produced 220 horsepower. For a Volkswagen engine in the mid-1960s, the numbers sounded absurd. At Carlsbad Raceway, the car ran 12.7 seconds at 106 miles per hour. The supercharged engine was later transferred into an even more extreme project known as the Juicer, a fiberglass-bodied Volkswagen that weighed only about 500 pounds. Its racing career ended in 1968 at Orange County International Raceway after a rear suspension failure. Driver Lee Layton escaped without serious injury, but the car was finished. The inch pincher itself entered its most recognizable form in 1967. That year, the NHRA changed the gas class weight brake rules. Lowry responded by completely rebuilding what had once been Daryl's high school transportation. The standard Volkswagen torsion bar front suspension was removed and replaced with a straight axle. This was the classic gasser solution of the era. Raising the nose was not merely a visual fashion. It encouraged weight transfer toward the rear tires during launch, improving traction. The floor was reskined in aluminum. Steel body panels were replaced with fiberglass. The original oval rear window was removed in favor of a larger early 1960s window. The glass was exchanged for plexiglass. The body received red metal flake paint and flames. By the end of the rebuild, the Beetle weighed roughly 1,200 pounds, around 500 pounds less than it had when Daryl drove it to school. The magnesium BRM wheels were another remarkable detail. Through Joe Vitone's connection with British Racing Motors, the inch pincher became one of the earliest cars to use them. Components associated with Formula One had somehow found their way onto a Volkswagen competing at California drag strips. In this form, the car became a winner on a national stage. At the 1967 Hot Rod Magazine Championship Drags at Riverside Raceway, Dean Lowry won Street Eliminator. The Beetle ran 12.92 seconds at 102 miles per hour and defeated a highboy from John's Speed Shop. A young spectator named David Carl Peters watched from the stands that day. He later became a motorsport artist and created a painting called Bad Bug, inspired by the experience of seeing the Volkswagen race. Peters remembered the emotional progression in the crowd. Older hot rodders would complain when the little car approached the line. They would boo it, mock it, and then slowly begin cheering as it continued taking win lights. He also challenged the way magazines described the car. Period captions sometimes presented the inch pincher as a universal favorite. Peters remembered something different. In his view, it was the most hated car in drag racing because many enthusiasts did not even consider the Beetle a proper car and because they could not beat it. Either reason would have been enough to provoke resentment. Together, they drove people mad. The Beetle's record at major events justified the attention. At the 1966 NHRA World Finals in Tulsa, the inch pincher faced Tom Tanner's UFO Plymouth Belvedere funny car in a pairing that looked almost comically unequal. Before reaching that round, EMPI reported that the Volkswagen had already defeated a collection of Fords, Chevrolets, Plymouths, and mixed brand specials. Photographs also document the inch pincher at the 1966 NHRA Division 7 Points Championship at Irwindale and at the 1970 NHRA World Finals in Dallas. A Champion Sparkplug advertisement from 1967 promoted it as the world's fastest Volkswagen. The Little Beetle had become famous. At the same time, the larger gasser movement was producing some of the most memorable cars in drag racing history. In the supercharged S/gas and B/gas categories, teams such as Stone, Woods, and Cook became legends. Their series of 1941 Willys sedans, known as the Swindler cars, combined enormous power, short wheelbases, and the unmistakable nose-eye stance of the period. The team was also historically important. Fred Stone and Tim Woods were black competitors in a sport that was overwhelmingly white, while Dub Cook served as driver. Their operation is widely remembered as the first racially integrated major team in competitive drag racing. At the peak of the gasser wars, their blown Chrysler-powered Willys became the first gasser to exceed 150 miles per hour. The team raced as often as 8 times per month, and one of its cars is now preserved at the Wally Park's NHRA Motorsports Museum. Another giant of the era was Ohio George Montgomery. His light blue 1933 Willys earned 8 NHRA national titles between 1959 and 1968, including 4 victories at the U.S. Nationals. His car eventually entered the Henry Ford Museum. Big John Mazmanian campaigned a candy apple red 1941 Willys. His rivalry with Stone, Woods, and Cook was intensified by competing camshaft sponsors. Iskandarian backed Stone, Woods, and Cook, while Engel supported Mazmanian, and the companies traded provocative advertisements in drag news. It was sport, engineering, marketing, and theater all at once. The visual signature of these machines was the elevated front end. Builders often discarded the factory-independent suspension and installed a straight I-beam or tubular axle. The raised nose improved rearward weight transfer on launch, forcing the rear tires into the track. Short, light bodies exaggerated the effect. The 1933 Willys Model 77 became especially desirable because of its compact dimensions, low mass, and rule-friendly frame. Ford Anglias, Austin sedans, early Chevrolets, and Corvettes were all adapted according to the same basic objective: achieve the most favorable relationship between weight and engine displacement. The inch pincher pursued that objective from the opposite direction. The traditional gassers combined pre-war American bodies with supercharged V8s exceeding 400 cubic inches. The Volkswagen used a small, purpose-built air-cooled engine inside a light post-war German body. The calculations were different. The competitive result was not. By 1968, Dean Lowry had left EMPI. Together with his brother Ken, he founded Dino Dinosaurs in Santa Ana. Vintage Volkswagen enthusiasts still recognize the company's cartoon dinosaur emblem. Dino Dinosaurs developed products that became milestones in Volkswagen performance. Its Ultra case allowed engines to be expanded to nearly 3 liters, and the company produced some of the first aftermarket VW cylinder heads designed specifically for drag racing. The business closed in 1972, but Lowry's influence survived. His contribution to air-cooled Volkswagen performance is difficult to exaggerate, even though the car he created became more famous than he did. After Lowry's departure, Darrell Vitone resumed control of the inch pincher. He revised it again, adding a flower power-style vinyl roof, a later front end, a 1,952 cubic centimeters engine, and a Porsche transmission. In I/gas trim, the car regularly ran in the low 12-second range. Yet Darrell faced an uncomfortable problem. To much of the racing public, the inch pincher remained Dean Lowry's creation. Darrell wanted to demonstrate that he could build a record-setting car of his own. Around 1970, he began again. He retained the original chassis and mechanical components but sold the 1956 oval window body to a buyer in Mexico City. He then selected a 1959 Volkswagen sedan as the basis for the next version. The roof was chopped by slightly less than 4 inches. The exact amount was important because it kept the car legal while lowering both the center of gravity and the frontal area. The new body received fiberglass doors, deck lids, and fenders, along with polished BRM wheels and a plexiglass sunroof. This car became the Inch Pincher 2. The name used the word 2, not the numeral 2. It appeared in early 1971 wearing plain white primer and simple EMPI graphics. On its first competitive outing at the NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, it set a national record of 12.11 seconds at 111.5 miles per hour. It then ran 11.98 seconds at 111.1 miles per hour. That was the quickest elapsed time of the entire event, not merely its class. After the debut, the car went to painter Roland Molly Sanders. He gave it one of the most recognizable liveries in Volkswagen history, an asymmetrical arrangement of candy red, orange, and blue panels. The interior was finished in anodized aluminum, with a chrome roll bar and hand-stitched upholstery. The engine and gearbox were gold cadmium plated. It looked like a show car. It ran 11-second quarter miles. Its engineering was equally serious. The first major engine used an 88mm bore and 82mm stroke, an SPG roller crank, dual 48 IDA Webers, an Engel 851 camshaft, 1.4:1 ratio rockers, and modified dual-port heads with 39mm intake and 35.5mm exhaust valves. The combination produced approximately 170 horsepower in a car weighing about 1,366 pounds. Fumio Fukaya, a highly respected cylinder head specialist who later became Darrell's business partner, enlarged the valves to roughly 42 by 37.5 millimeters and refined the heads further. The exhaust used a 1 5/8-inch header and a long chrome stinger. Power went through a Porsche 356 4-speed fitted with a ZF limited slip differential. The transmission was the car's persistent weakness and struggled to survive the power passing through it. Despite that problem, Darrell won Eliminator at the 1972 NHRA Winter Nationals. The Inch Pincher 2 defeated cars including the Lightning Bug and the Underdog and reportedly ran as quickly as 11.5 seconds at 115 miles per hour at Orange County Raceway. The Lightning Bug became its most important direct rival. Brothers Paul and Mark Schley began racing in 1963 while still in high school. Their mother worried that a muscle car would lead them into trouble, so they ended up with a Volkswagen instead. Paul later explained that the choice was not part of a grand strategy. The Beetle was simply the only car they owned. They built 3 versions of the Lightning Bug. The second was sponsored by Dean Lowry's Dino Dinosaurs after Lowry had left EMPI. The situation was deeply ironic. Darrell's strongest opponent was receiving help from the man who had built the original Inch Pincher. The Lightning Bug eventually became the first Volkswagen Beetle to enter the 10-second range. The Schley brothers later established Schley Products, a manufacturer of specialty tools, and preserved much of their racing history in a private collection. Both the Lightning Bug and Inch Pincher appeared at the final event ever held at Lyons Drag Strip. They were not alone. The success of the Inch Pincher helped create an entire ecosystem of serious Volkswagen drag cars. Ron Fleming and Greg Aronson built the Underdog. Both men would also become important figures in the California Look Street Volkswagen movement. The first Underdog was destroyed after becoming airborne, and Fleming later built a replacement that continued racing until roughly 1973. Bill Clarkson built the Iguana, a 1956 Beetle capable of running between 11.9 and 12.1 seconds at more than 110 miles per hour. Clarkson said the idea came after watching the inch pincher accelerate past a Corvette at Irwindale. Other cars followed, the Stuttgart Motors Stubby, Mother's Mini Car, and the Little Bugger, which set an NHRA record in 1972 before crashing and being destroyed on the same day. At the far end of the spectrum was the Durachrome Bug, a full Volkswagen-bodied funny car with a nitromethane-burning Chevrolet engine. It ran approximately 7 seconds at 210 miles per hour and became one of the era's best-remembered exhibition machines. The inch pincher did not directly design every one of these cars, but it changed what builders believed was possible. Before Lowry and the Bitones proved the concept, few people treated the Volkswagen as a serious drag racing platform. Afterward, an entire community did. While the racing program was flourishing, the company behind it began to collapse. Around 1970 or 1971, Joe Vitone sold EMPI to Filter Dynamics International, a corporation acquiring automotive aftermarket businesses across Southern California. Vitone accepted stock as part of the deal. The shares later proved nearly worthless. At its height, EMPI reportedly sold between $5 and $6 million worth of Volkswagen parts annually and operated through 28 distributors and 489 agents across the United States. Under FDI, the business deteriorated and closed in 1974. The EMPI name was later sold and passed through several owners. People who worked around the company during that period later described Filter Dynamics in extremely harsh terms. Their conclusion was simple: Joe Vitone had been badly deceived. Darrell left EMPI in 1972 and founded the race shop with Dave Andrews and Fumio Fukaya. But leaving the company meant leaving the inch pincher too. The car belonged to the business that had been sold. Darrell walked away from the machine he had designed and developed, and the loss appears to have remained with him. The Beetle passed to driver Jim Carlson and then through a sequence of later owners. It never fully recovered the stature it had achieved with Darrell. His next project divided Volkswagen enthusiasts. Darrell installed a VW engine into a Fiat A50 Spider and built a drag car that ran 10.3 seconds at more than 130 miles per hour. Technically, it was a major achievement and dramatically faster than the cars in its class. Many Volkswagen loyalists did not care. To them, Darrell had abandoned the Beetle. Years later, enthusiasts still argued that he should have negotiated for the inch pincher name and car instead of creating a Volkswagen-powered Fiat. The project demonstrated his engineering ability, but it also alienated part of the audience that had followed him. Darrell continued working with water-cooled Volkswagens from the late 1970s. In 1981, he founded Tectonics Tuning, which became one of North America's longest-running water-cooled VW performance companies. He moved the operation from Southern California to Sheridan, Oregon, in 1991. His philosophy could be summarized by one of his best-known sayings: a single dynamometer test is worth more than 1,000 expert opinions. Even after surviving bladder cancer and undergoing major surgery, Darrell continued pursuing speed. He raced a Carmen Ghia at Bonneville using an engine based on a 1,200 cubic centimeters block and exceeded 160 miles per hour. He died around 2020. A tribute published by the Volkswagen community argued that, outside Volkswagen itself, no single person had influenced more enthusiasts to become interested in the brand. That judgment is difficult to dismiss. Joe Vitone eventually moved to Florida. In later life, he became a pilot and built and flew his own aircraft. He died in February 2010 at the age of 86. Before his death, he attended Florida Bug Jam, where he met enthusiasts and signed EMPI and GTV steering wheels. People who encountered him remembered him as generous and approachable. He had begun by manufacturing replacement valve guides. He ended up helping transform an entire branch of American motorsport. The physical fate of the original inch pincher cars is far less satisfying. The first car, the 1956 oval window Beetle Darrell had once driven to school, lost its body when it was sold to someone in Mexico City around 1970 during construction of the inch pincher 2. Most researchers believe the complete car no longer exists. In March 2014, however, Dean Kirsten and Paul Schley discovered an extraordinary surviving fragment in a small town north of Phoenix. They found a driver's door wearing the car's final paint scheme. It had remained hidden for more than 42 years. Only a door survived, but its identity was confirmed and the discovery was reported in the Volkswagen press. The inch pincher 2 became even more difficult to trace. After EMPI, Jim Carlson, and a succession of later owners, the car's history became uncertain. Some accounts claim it was taken to South America and dismantled. Another unverified story places it in a wrecking yard near Waco, Texas. No conclusive public evidence has settled the matter. Most historians believe the body is gone. It is still possible that some portion of it survives undiscovered. The inch pincher 3 had a clearer fate. Richard Borrino of Competition Car Parts raced the East Coast car, and it eventually went to Japan. Today it is owned by Flat 4, one of the world's most prominent Volkswagen aftermarket companies. Borrino later visited the car after more than 3 decades apart. In the early 1990s, Flat 4 also constructed a faithful replica of the inch pincher 2 to promote the introduction of its BRM-style wheel. The effort reflected the extraordinary respect Japanese Volkswagen enthusiasts have shown for this chapter of American racing history. New tributes have continued to appear. Builder Travis Riddle created the inch pincher 4, a right-hand drive 1958 Beetle finished in apricot metal flake and powered by a 2,500 cubic centimeters engine producing more than 200 horsepower. The car appeared at SEMA and received wide attention. Another machine, the inch pincher 8, used 2 air-cooled Flat 4 engines and later appeared on the cover of a Volkswagen magazine. The sequence did not end with the original cars. It became a lineage. The Gasser era itself faded for reasons larger than any one Volkswagen. Funny cars offered greater spectacle, stronger factory involvement, and more commercial appeal. Safety concerns also grew as short wheelbase, high center of gravity machines reached speeds their original chassis had never been designed to handle. In 1967, the NHRA began allowing newer bodies into the gas categories. Even established racers such as Ohio George moved toward lightweight fiberglass Mustang bodies. Pro Stock debuted at the 1970 Winter Nationals and offered manufacturers a new form of production-based racing. By 1972, the NHRA had eliminated the independent gas classes. Surviving cars moved into competition eliminator, superstock, exhibition racing, museums, or private garages. The Gasser wars became history. Yet the cars never lost their visual power. The raised noses, bright candy paint, pre-war bodies, post-war engines, improvised engineering, and limited budgets created something uniquely compelling. The movement was inventive, stubborn, slightly chaotic, and deeply suspicious of accepted limits. The inch pincher represented all of those qualities. Then it added one more provocation. It was a Volkswagen. Traditional hot rodders dismissed the Beetle as an underpowered economy car with an engine better suited to a lawnmower. Dean Lowry discovered how much performance could be extracted from its air-cooled Flat 4. Darrell Vittone developed that work into faster, cleaner, and more sophisticated machines. Joe Vittone built the company that financed the experiments and placed them in front of the public. Together, they created a car that defeated American hot rods using the rules of American drag racing. That was why people booed it. That was also why they remembered it. Hot Rod magazine eventually placed the inch pincher at number 53 among the most influential hot rods ever built. Museums, historians, artists, companies, and builders continued to preserve different pieces of its legacy. David Carl Peters captured its atmosphere in Bad Bug, a small Volkswagen rolling toward the line while the grandstands waited to see which much larger car it would embarrass next. The original machines may be lost, scattered, or incomplete. Their influence is not. A truly important racing car does not need its reputation protected by nostalgia. Its results, its descendants, and the people it inspired make the argument on its behalf. The inch pincher has all 3.